Greetings, this playlist is basically going to deal with how to deal with chromatic harmony in a way that does not sound disjunct. This seems to be the hardest thing for students to actually do. And to be completely frank and honest, I've only had one student who's actually made it to the level of early romantic, late romantic harmony, and actually does understand it. Usually people quit by the time they get through Mozart harmony and whatnot, but this actually goes back to Bach, this topic we're talking about, but does apply to the late romantic masters of highly chromatic music. And I'm going to show you one of the reasons why your chromatic harmony, whether it's modulation passages, may not sound as good as you'd want them. This is one of the biggest reasons right here. So let's take something that's chorale-like, okay? I could do this. Really, really well thought out voice leading. And it sounds like it works right off the bat, whether it's a chorale, piano music, or string music. Why does this work out so well? Because these outside voices are very, very well planned to not be disjunct. In other words, there's a lot of dependence on this voice leading techniques that you would learn from a Bach chorale. Let's take the same harmonic sequence and voice it like this. Sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? There's not nearly as much of a flow. Let me play it up a little faster. Now the other way I voiced it, with better voice leading, that sounds way smoother. And the reason is the two outside lines are really well thought out to have really good voice leading. In fact, the two outside lines sound like they could stand apart by themselves. So this is a good reason to study Bach chorales. Listen to the other way we did it. The outside voices. It sounds very bizarre. It doesn't sound like it works at all by itself. But going back to great voice leading, these outside voices could work by themselves without the inner harmony as a part. And by teaching chromatic harmony, I've found that students usually do stuff like this. That sounds very disjunct. It doesn't sound like it works by itself. These outside voices, that's the most important aspect. Because they don't spend enough time studying the Bach chorales and the Mozart music and whatnot and learning good voice leading. They want to jump straight ahead to John Williams. So let me do something like this. I'm going to take a bunch of dominant chords that are a third away and then finally go to a B flat. I'll label the chords in a second. But we're going to do a test. We're going to have two ways we could present this. In impressionistic music, for instance, it might be common to jump from one to the other without any good voice leading. That's an effect. And as I stick the bass notes in, or in guitar music, you play a lot of parallel chords, which is not really great voice leading. I'm not saying that's bad, it's just not going to result in smooth sounding chromatic passages. Parallel. More something Debussy would do, a bunch of parallel dominant chords. In fact, you might avoid the B flat altogether and just do something like this. Just a bunch of parallel dominant chords. There's nothing wrong with that, but you want smooth connections in a modulation like this. Let's say we're going to B flat. In a smooth way again, like I said, we have to change this a little bit. Smooth as in the connections sound more fluid, and this is what late romantic era music does. Not this parallelism. So what I first might do is identify all the common tones. We got this A is a common tone to the D dominant. And so is the F sharp. So in other words, keeping these common tones now to the B flat. So basically we're getting this walk-up motion instead of parallelism, which will sound completely different. So in other words, our outside lines are much smoother as opposed to parallelism. The voice leading is much more thought out. So in a way, it's actually much easier to jump from one parallel chord to the other without thinking this through, because that's easier to do than thinking it through with good voice leading. Let's start the B7 on the third. Let's figure this out. If we go downward by a step, instead of jumping around, now we go downward again, we could go straight to B flat, almost like we're in the B flat scale in the top. much smoother than the parallel motion. And interestingly enough, planned this way, you look at the outside voices, they're both in B flat. Much more planned out than parallelism. It takes a little bit more. Now this takes a lot more problem solving skills than it does to just simply move these chords parallel like this. But the payoff is your chromatic harmony passages will sound much smoother. So let me take an example of a personal piece. I don't have this on YouTube, but here's a passage. So that passage took me a little while to figure out because I had to figure out how to make this voice leading smooth instead of just all random like this, all over the place. Because I knew that same passage with random jumping would sound disjunct. So if I play the outside voices, they're exactly the same on each transition. And speaking about super complex chromatic modulation like that, there is a method to the Wagner type of madness, but it requires you to memorize a whole ton of functional moves in a smaller way, because they're just temporarily used at this point, tonally obscure in other words. This playlist is basically going to revolve around chromatic harmony tips, including with modulation, and showing you there is a method to the madness of those late Romantic era composers. It's just most people don't see the connections until somebody points it out.